Hey there. I want to talk to you about Nancy Pelosi. Yeah, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. You know that one. We need to talk about her and the January 6th committee and the January 6th situation in general. A lot of people think that Nancy Pelosi has nothing to do with security of the Capitol, and they might get that idea from some of these fact checks. So, first, I want to look at these fact checks about Nancy Pelosi's responsibility for security of the Capitol. And then we're going to read a letter from Mr. Sund, who was the Capitol police chief at the time of the J6 riot. And there's some interesting things in his letter that kind of point to the fact that Nancy Pelosi is lying, and a lot of people are lying for Nancy Pelosi. I want to show you these fact checks. We're going to watch a video as well. They released a video, the January 6th committee, a nicely done, pre-edited video, and it was filmed by Nancy Pelosi's daughter-in-law. Well, we're going to watch some of that film today, and we're going to see if those claims that Nancy Pelosi is not responsible for security, let's see if those have any water when we watch these clips here. So basically what happened is the January 6th committee, in their big finale, just outed themselves and really just showed who is actually responsible at the end of the day for security of the Capitol. So stick around. Let's look at these fact checks first. Okay, so our first stop here is PolitiFact. You can get a lot of disinformation on PolitiFact. It's a good place for that. And let's notice what this fact check is titled. Only Nancy Pelosi is, quote, responsible for what happened at the Capitol, quote, on January 6th. Quote, security at the Capitol is her job, end quote. So notice what they did with just the title here. They put responsible for what happened at the Capitol in quotation marks. And they added this top part, only Nancy Pelosi is responsible. And nobody really said only Nancy Pelosi is really responsible. They added that themselves in order to throw in a bad fact so that they could call this fact check false. They added in false information or false pretext into the title in order to make it false quickly here. And it says Capitol security is not her job. And it's really just talking about these Facebook posts of people saying only one person responsible for what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, Nancy Pelosi. Security at the Capitol is her job. And notice this sentence right here. The delay in deploying the National Guard was caused by communication breakdowns, inaction, and confusion over who had authority to call for the National Guard, the Times analysis found. Now, do you really believe that there was confusion among all of those congressional leaders about who had the authority to call the National Guard? I don't believe that for a second. So Pelosi called for this investigation and pretty much said that she didn't want to be part of it and kind of pushed all the responsibility off onto other people. So let's read here. Security is provided by the Sergeant at Arms of the House. True. The Sergeant at Arms of the Senate and the Capitol Police. The House Sergeant at Arms reports to the House Speaker Pelosi. Okay, so we even see in the fact check right here, the House Sergeant at Arms reports to the House Speaker Pelosi, which means Pelosi is in charge of the Sergeant at Arms, who is in charge of security. The Senate Sergeant at Arms reports to the Senate Majority Leader, then Mitch McConnell. The Capitol Police is overseen by a 4-member board that includes both sergeants at arms. News reports indicate that before the attack, the House Sergeant at Arms resisted calls from the Capitol Police to bring in the National Guard for extra security at the Capitol because of optics. But he said intelligence reports didn't warrant the extra security, which we now know is false. And let's look at this second one here. This is USA Today. Fact check. Nancy Pelosi wasn't in charge of Capitol Police on January 6th. Okay. So they're kind of throwing in a Nancy Pelosi wasn't, quote, in charge of the Capitol Police on January 6th. So, no crap. I mean, that's pretty obvious. And that's an obvious statement that everybody knows isn't true. But who does the responsibility fall back on? And that is Nancy Pelosi. Let's read on here. Pelosi in charge of Capitol Police. The Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, is responsible for the police officers of Capitol Hill, Carr said in the email. On January 6th, they were understaffed due to her lack of oversight. With the lack of personnel, the United States Capitol was breached, which should have never happened. Now she is in charge of the investigation of what happened on January 6th. And then here we go. What about Pelosi's appointment powers? O'Hanley told USA Today there are questions about Pelosi's objectivity since she has the ability to appoint or control members of both the Capitol Police and January 6th investigation. That's a true statement. But Pelosi does not appoint members to the Capitol Police Board. So that prior paragraph here didn't mention anything about the Capitol Police Board. She doesn't appoint the Capitol Police Board members, and we're going to find out why right here. Both the House and the Senate sergeants at arms are elected and confirmed by their respective chambers. So they're voted on by the House, voted on by the Senate. They report to the heads of those chambers. Oh, wait a minute. Who's the head of the chamber? Oh, on January 6th, that was Pelosi and former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. The president appoints the Capitol architect for a 10-year term with, who cares? Okay, so Pelosi doesn't appoint these members to the board. She swears them in. They're elected. They're not appointed officials, they're elected officials. But they still have a supervisor. They still have a boss, and that is the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader. Okay, so they call it false here, and let's read what they say because it's some tricky wording. The claim that Pelosi was in charge of Capitol Police on January 6th is false, based on our research. Great research. While the House Speaker has some ties to Capitol Police oversight, saying Pelosi is in charge of the agency isn't accurate. The agency is overseen by a 3-member board, none of whom are appointed by Pelosi. Now, let me tell you who that 3-member board is. It's the Sergeant at Arms of the House, it's the Sergeant at Arms of the Senate, and it's the Chief of the Capitol Police. So no, none of them are appointed by Pelosi, but do they report to Pelosi? Yeah, they do. And it is her responsibility. So we see that the fact checks are already trying to get us confused and lie to us here. Now let's read this letter from Mr. Sund. So what we have here is a letter from the former chief of the Capitol Police, Stephen Sund. And this was sent to the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, on February 1st of 2021. So this was less than a month after the January 6th incident. And we're not going to go through the whole letter. It's a long letter. I just want to point out some things that I think are relevant to what I'm trying to discuss here, and that's Nancy Pelosi's responsibility with the security and also the lack of security and lack of intelligence. But let's read on here. So the first thing he says is about the intelligence, and he says the FBI, Secret Service, Department of Homeland Security, and DC Metro Police, none of them indicated a well-coordinated armed assault on the Capitol. Now, I would dispute this term armed, but anyways, we'll read on. So Mr. Sund had been law enforcement for 30 years. He's seen a lot. Suffice it to say that I have never seen anything like the violent insurrection we witnessed on January 6th. Think about this for a minute. Have you ever seen violence at a Trump rally? Have you ever seen violence at any Trump protest? And we're going to see later on in this letter that no, you don't see any violence. And the other thing is, he's going to talk about how this was well coordinated. And the whole January 6th committee is trying to find evidence that Donald Trump incited a insurrection with his speech. And we all know that's not true. We all know that the timeline doesn't line up with that. So a well-coordinated event, a well-coordinated attack doesn't just come about from being incited from nowhere. There were other large protests planned by pro-Trump supporters located at the Supreme Court, which was line up with that. So a well-coordinated event, a well-coordinated attack doesn't just come about from being incited from nowhere. There were other large protests planned by pro-Trump supporters located at the Supreme Court, which was located at the Supreme Court, which is just adjacent to the Capitol grounds. Thousands of people were there. They handled those events successfully, and they had an action plan, and they used it. Both of these events that indicated that various extremist groups were expected to attend the events and that there was a likelihood of violence. So the other two events, previous events, they had intelligence of likely extremist groups coming in and likely violence. So during these two protests, there was a limited amount of violence and or injuries to officers and a limited number of arrests. So as previously mentioned, the intelligence showed that there would be supremacist groups like the Proud Boys and the white supremacist group Antifa. Now, Antifa is not on Donald Trump's side. Let's just put it that way. And Antifa is also known for violence and, setting a church on fire right across from the White House. And nobody is in jail for that, I don't think, yet. Interesting, right? Anyways, there was no indication that anybody would become violent. It was very remote to improbable that any groups were expected to demonstrate on that day. I'm calling BS on that one. At no time during the previous MAGA 1 or MAGA 2 events did the crowd attempt to storm or attack the Supreme Court building or the adjacent Capitol building. So we've already had two events with thousands of people, and there was no violence and very few arrests. On Monday, January 4th, the two sergeants at arms, he talked to them to request the National Guard because he doesn't have authority to call the National Guard unless he has an emergency declaration by the Capitol Police Board, which means the other two sergeants at arms, which means the other two sergeants at arms need to go to their supervisors. So, House Sergeant at Arms to request the National Guard, Mr. Irving stated that he was concerned about the optics and didn't feel that the intelligence supported it. He didn't want it to look bad. Now, remember, this was the same people who shut down D.C. after the inauguration and had National Guard everywhere and brought them in from all over the place and brought thousands and thousands of troops like we were under attack. That wasn't a very good optic. Anyways, so Mr. Stinger, who is the Senate Sergeant at Arms, he also spoke to him and requested the National Guard. Mr. Stinger suggested I asked him how quickly we could get support if needed and to lean forward in case we had to request assistance on January 6th. So they're not saying, yeah, go ahead. And when we go down here, when the group arrived at the perimeter, they did not act like any group of protesters I had ever seen. Remember, this guy's been in law enforcement for 30 years. He's seen a lot of different protests. As soon as this group arrived, they immediately began to fight the officers. Their primary goal was to defeat the perimeter. This mob was like nothing I have seen in my law enforcement career. They were well coordinated, well equipped, and violent criminals. Again, well coordinated and well equipped doesn't fit incitement. So if Donald Trump, his speech incited all these people to quickly get well coordinated and well equipped and head to the Capitol and try out an insurrection, that would make sense. But that doesn't actually fall along the lines of that, does it? And this is the best part. A number of them were wearing radio earpieces, indicating a high level of coordination. And now we know that there was at least 20 FBI agents among the crowd that day. The two sergeant at arms at 1:09 p.m. He urgently needed support, and he asked them to declare a state of emergency to authorize the National Guard. Mr. Irving, remember, is the House sergeant at arms. Mr. Irving needed to run it up the chain of command. Now, who is the chain of command for Mr. Irving? Remember who oversees the sergeant at arms? The Speaker of the House. So it'd be Nancy Pelosi. And then Mitch McConnell for the Senate. And he said that Mr. Stinger, which is the Senate sergeant at arms, he had to wait to hear back from congressional leadership, but expected authorization at any moment. This is at 1:09 p.m. And remember, he's waiting to hear back from congressional leadership. Who is the congressional leadership? It's Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. And so at 2:10 p.m., Mr. Irving and the CPB authorized the request for the National Guard. Okay. And then this is a long story about how it was a big pain in the butt. At approximately 2:28 p.m., authorization for National Guard support, they needed to get the Pentagon to approve the request. And what really confuses me about this is these are high-level security people. They've done this before. They have plans set out for all of these events. They have action plans already written up. How do they not know who they need for authorization for the National Guard? How can they do this ping pong thing and pretend like nobody knows who authorizes the National Guard? It doesn't make any sense to me. So, this is what Lieutenant General Walter Piatt said, and he's, I believe, the commander of the DC National Guard. I don't like the visual of the National Guard standing a line with the Capitol in the background. Now, Walter Piatt is the director of the Army staff. They don't want to put the National Guard out there because they're afraid it's going to look bad. But these are the same people that, remember, after the inauguration, had the Capitol looking like East Germany. So that doesn't seem like it falls into their narrative either. And then at 5:40 p.m., that's the first time the National Guard got on Capitol grounds. 5:40 p.m., 4.5 hours after I first requested them. The entire intelligence community seems to have missed this. Isn't that strange? How the entire intelligence community is usually on top of everything. All these extremists and Proud Boys, but somehow they just missed this. And finally, this is what he really blames for January 6th. He says the impact of incomplete information provided by intelligence assessments, the denied National Guard request, and the subsequent delayed approval for National Guard assistance. So that's what Stephen Sund, the former chief of Capitol Police, said about his experience with January 6th. We're going to watch some of Nancy's movie that she put together, and we're going to see if her role in security is there or if she just is totally hands off.
Certificates sent by the governors, which embody the will of the people.
You're in the game. This is it, and we have to be ready in a timely fashion. And the more quickly we can have the votes, the more quickly we can designate Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, President and Vice President of the United States. I just want to say this and close in this way. Today is the Feast of the Epiphany, January 6th. Visit of the Magi, the west of the world, seeing the birth of Christ in that. And let us pray in any way that you do for our country, and that today will be an epiphany for the American people as they see the difference between our respect for the oath we take versus what they're up to. And let us hope that they will see the light and have their own epiphany on the other side.
Dissuaded him from coming to Capitol Hill. They told him they don't have the resources to protect him here. So at the moment he is not coming, but that could change.
Oh, he comes, I'm going to punch him out. This is
Oh,
my
wow,
moment.
I would pay to see
I've
that.
been waiting for this. for trespassing on the Capitol grounds.
Wait, what did Nancy just say?
This is
Oh,
my
wow,
moment.
I would pay to see
I've
that.
been waiting for this, for trespassing on the Capitol grounds.
Now, I want you to pay close attention to this clip and listen to what Nancy Pelosi is asking while they're being evacuated.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes. We did. Yes. That's correct.
Now, why is Nancy Pelosi calling for the National Guard and trying to coordinate with Mitch McConnell when the fact checkers have already told us that the security is not her responsibility?
My wife just told watching TV, there are people with guns trying to get into the House chamber.
One of them's in the president of the Senate seat.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Where are you?
They broke into the Senate chamber. There's a picture of someone sitting in this chair of the Senate. We've all been evacuated. There's been shots fired. We need a full National Guard component now. We have some senators who are still in their hideaways. They need massive personnel now. Can you get the Maryland National Guard to come too? Okay.
Oh my gosh, they're just breaking windows, they're doing all, it's just horrendous, and all at the instigation of the President of the United States. Okay, thank you, Governor.
Here's another clip of Nancy Pelosi's very small part in security on January 6th.
They're in one hell of a hurry, you understand?
This cannot be just we're waiting for so-and-so. We need them there now, whoever you got.
Just pretend for a moment it was the Pentagon or the White House or some other entity that was under siege. You can logistically get people there as you make the plan. And you have some leadership of the National Guard there. They have not been given the authority to be activated.
These people will lie to your face, and they're fork-tongued liars. They give you half-truths and lies, and they talk about all this mis and disinformation, but they are the purveyors of mis and disinformation. And who am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the government, the federal government, and the current regime that is in charge. And this is just a small part of the coup that has taken place. I hope you got something out of this, and I really ask you to look down below at the subscribe button, and if it is red, please click on it. Also, the like button, you can click on that, and that'll help me out a lot. But thanks for coming. I missed you. Peace be with you. See you again.